Hello and welcome to the She Dares Wins podcast. And my guest today is Hazel. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so I know, but can you tell me how you dared and won?
Yeah, I was thinking about this. Obviously, as a climber, there's so many instances where you're like, I'm not sure about this, but I'm going to try it. And, sometimes you win, sometimes you don't. And I don't know whether we care what we mean by winning because there's different ways of looking at what it means to win. But the example I wanted to actually talk about is starting my business because I think it's relatable. But also, I think that I grew up as a climber. It was part of my identity from such an early age. It's easy to kind of dare in the contexts that if you know what I mean.
Interesting.
Yeah. And you kind of know the perimeters, you know the kind of risk-reward ratio, you learn to trust yourself. So you can still dare within that framework, and that's probably the better place to dare of anything. But to actually totally step outside of that and do something new and different, that felt sort of scary to me. Starting my business and then and I won in the sense that I'm really glad that I did it.
Yeah, I mean, that's what it is at the end of the day, isn't it? It means so many different things to so many different people. That's interesting that you say that climbing was part of your identity from when you were quite young. So you just see it as something that was you. But lots of people would be like, no, that's pretty, watch anything that you do on YouTube or, read about your climbs. They'd be like, that's insane. Tell me about how you became a climber.
So I started when I was really small, like 6 or even younger. My dad was a climber. And so we just lived and breathed it really. And it wasn't like, oh, we're going to start climbing now. It was like we already were sort of scrambling around and climbing just when we were hiking. And so it was more like we just went on adventures, and climbing was part of that sort of adventurous outdoor life. And then, just got more and more serious about climbing, I guess, and then started competing. And then, but I don't know if you know this, but competitions in the climbing world are all inside, so they're on artificial walls. So if you love the outdoor aspect of climbing, it would be hard to commit to being a competitor. So it was never really my thing. It was kind of something I did as a kid, and then became a sponsored climber when I left university.
I did not know that. So it's mainly indoors, and then so exploring the outdoors obviously is your main passion. Pro climber then, what is that? A certain level of competition, or is that just like a sponsored athlete? What's the official title? How does that come about?
Yeah, so for me it was being a sponsored athlete, and it had nothing to do with competitions. They knew I wasn't a competition climber.
Okay.
I was trying to find I think maybe if you know anything about skiing, you can think of that. It's some professional skiers do the ski racing kind of thing. I mean, this is some high expertise, but then some are sort of more just ski down cool mountains, and they have videos of them doing it. That's kind of the kind of climber that I am.
Okay.
So I'm not winning anything. But in climbing, you also have grades. Even all of the outdoor climbs are graded, which then means that you can somewhat kind of compare yourself to other athletes in that style of climbing. So there's sorts of ways of at least figuring out what level of climber you are, even if you're not a competitor, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it completely makes sense. So living on the level of difficulty. But you've had some real big firsts in your career, haven't you? Were you the first British woman to... This is where my research needs to come in, right? Were you the first British woman to climb El Capitan?
Free climb El Capitan. And free does not mean climbing without a rope. So that's
good.
The biggest misconception.
Right.
That people get wrong. And the film with Alex Honnold called Free Solo you'd think would help clarify it, because it's the solo bit that means that he's well, the two together mean that he's climbing on his own without a rope, and he's just using his hands and feet to climb.
Right.
So whereas free climbing, you're just using your hands and feet to get up the wall, but you have the rope as a backup.
Okay.
Yeah. And then aid climbing, which no one really knows anything about and only some people do, is when you like use the equipment itself to help pull you up. So it's sort of like any means to get up the wall kind of thing.
Ah, right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, because when I read free, I was like, oh my God, that's with no ropes. That's very interesting, because I think, probably a misconception outside of the climbing world. But irrelevant of that, that is massive. Like, I've actually been to Yosemite. I always get Yosemite and Yellowstone mixed up. And it is,
Yeah, it's very intimidating, El Capitan, isn't it? Yeah.
What made you kind of go for that? Did you know that you were going to be the first British woman, and was that part of the lore to it? Or was it just that this infamous mountain was there? So,
I can't actually remember thinking about being the first British woman or not. I can't remember if that was in my head. But the main thing is it's just a really obvious goal for a climber like me, basically. Someone who's sort of interested in hard free climbing. So just when the climbing itself is difficult, like the movement's difficult, but you also are interested in the adventure of like living on a wall for 6 days and having to like bring up all your food and water, and like the commitment aspect of that and the psychological challenge of that. It's just a very obvious challenge for a kind of category of climber, I suppose. And it's also just like one of the most beautiful looking walls in the world, you know, like even as a non-climber, I imagine you were like, whoa, like that is crazy.
Yeah.
And I think that people are familiar with it because I think the iOS had like El Capitan as its background for a while.
Yeah, it did. I think.
Yeah. It's just an iconic wall, you know. It's sort of like the Everest of rock climbing in some ways. So yeah, it was always something that I would want to do, regardless of whether I would be the first person to do it or not.
What age did you complete that?
Oh gosh. I was probably like 21 or 22, I think.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, my memory's quite bad for these sorts of things. Yeah.
The age,
to university,
I like
whatever age you are when you're after uni.
Yeah, that age, yeah. I like to think of that as an age where fear really hasn't crept in. I think the things that I did around about that age, and it was a lot of snowboarding and adventure stuff. I'm trying to think what my mindset was like. But is that your kind of career pinnacle, or do you have another climb that was more enjoyable?
In terms of difficulty, it wasn't my career pinnacle. I've climbed harder, you know, what we would call grades or more difficult climbs since then. In terms of experience, it was probably one of the better experiences of my career. It was definitely like I had like a lot of imposter syndrome before trying it. Like there was a lot of like, you know, do I even belong on this piece of rock sort of thing. And I had to like let go of a lot of fear of failure to be like, well, you've just got to try. Of course you don't know if you'll even get to the top of it, you know, because there's getting to the top of it, and then there's succeeding in free climbing it, which is where you know, it's a bit boring really, but you sort of, as a climber, it makes sense. But, you know, there's sort of certain rules really about how you climb it, that mean that make you have like able to sort of say, okay, I've free climbed this, and sort of to know that you free climbed it.
If you had a slip like up, and then you had to use your ropes, is that classed as like Does that like
Yeah.
knock? Oh, it does.
Well, so basically, right, it's really hard to explain. It's one of the reasons why, like, I find that climbing is quite hard to sort of translate. In some ways, climbing is like amazing metaphor, like that people use outside of climbing. But then when you actually get into the like what a climber's actually doing, it all starts to become a bit confusing. But so I fell off at times on that climb,
Mm-hmm.
but basically well, certainly with El Capitan, it's like you're then supposed to go back to the start of what we call a pitch, which is roughly a rope length.
Right.
So you break the climb into these pitches, and where the rope length ends, there's usually like a spot where you'd be able to rest and take your hands off. So that's the kind of like the natural resting point, but you have to be able to climb between that point and the next point without using the rope or the equipment or falling.
Okay.
Yeah, it's weird. It sort of makes sense when you do it, but when you explain it to people who don't climb, you're like, oh, why is that?
How does that work?
Yeah. But it makes this difficult challenge because it's like if you make a mistake, it's a bit like snakes and ladders. You've got to then go back, not all the way to the start, but some way back, 30 meters back down, something, right?
Okay.
And then, but that's then tiring to try that again. And you've only got so much energy, you've only got so much food and water. Your skin starts to get really sore and thin and cracked. So it's like there's sort of this pressure to perform in that moment, even though it's not a competition. It's like a lot of climbing, it's like the mindset that you're in is like, okay, it has to be now, or otherwise I have to go all the way back down to the bottom, or I have to get to the top but not succeed in my goal of free climbing it, and then I have to wait for the next weather window, or I have to go home and I have to train, and then I have to fly back to America the next year and try this again.
Wow.
So then it starts to like be, okay, there's actually a lot of pressure here on me if I want to achieve this goal.
And that brings me nicely on to like mindset. I'm finding the more that I speak to women in lots of different sports, just how much power the mind has. In climbing, I mean, the physical ability I just find absolutely fascinating, but how much of it is mental, like from just what you've said about that particular climb, there's a lot of thought that goes into it. A lot of mindset, and having imposter syndrome, throwing that into the mix as well. I know that's something that you've kind of moved on to with opening your coaching business. Well, actually, I'll firstly ask you, at what point in your career did you start to realise the importance of kind of mindset, or was that quite early on?
Yeah, so I think I realized really early on, like when I was a child, that like the difference between what made a good climber and a not so good climber was really what was going on in their mind. It wasn't necessarily the body, because like I would be like 7 years old and sometimes be climbing better than like men in their 40s.
Right.
And so some of that's movement for sure, like technical ability and movement is really important. But a lot of it is what's happening in your mind. And so if you allow yourself to be too stressed, to be too scared, whether that's fear of falling or fear of failure or fear of the exposure or fear of heights or fear of what your mates are going to say if you don't do the climb that they've all done, which sounds silly, but we are so socially primed, right? That those social fears are massive.
Mm-hmm.
That's all a big distraction. And climbers who can either don't have those distractions in the first place or learn how to manage them just are so much better on the wall. And then that allows your technique and your movement ability to shine through, and you develop that far quicker when you're climbing in a way that's like unburdened from these things. So I kind of knew that really early on, but what I didn't know is that it was something that you could work at and that you could train. I just kind of thought that like, oh, I'm a bit naturally better at this. Some people are naturally worse. those people are going to be like worse climbers. Like we'll just get on with it, and like through climbing we'll get better. And that is true to some extent, but then I started to sort of be more interested in psychology and read a bit more. And then it's like, oh, hang on a minute. They're like, there's this clearly something that we can get better at. Like, of course, that like on a physical level, we're all like naturally starting at different points. Some people arrive at climbing with like such amazing upper body strength. Like some climbers will start on the first day they have better upper body strength than me. Like if you're like a 15-year-old lad full of testosterone, you can do like 50 pull-ups,
Yeah.
So, but we also know that we can all improve physically, that we can all get stronger and fitter if we try. And it's exactly the same with mindset and what I call mental training and fear management and all of those skills. It's like, yeah, we are starting at slightly different places based on who we are, where we come from, our experiences, but we can all get better. And I think that I slowly started to realize that, and then started to learn and then teach, and then eventually starting my coaching business where I help other climbers, predominantly other climbers, although I have coached people outside of the climbing space as well, with like fear management, performance psychology, and mindset.
And would you say it's the journey to becoming a better climber from an internal perspective and not the physical side is easier? Is it easier to work on the mind or the body, or is it pretty much?
Depends who you are. I think overall it's easier to work on the body because it's much easier to track. It's why think how much we know about physical health compared to mental health.
Yeah.
It's just psychology and mental health are just notoriously difficult. Like the brain as an organ is so complex, and it's hidden in our skulls. And it's really hard to study it. And also just like, so that on the sort of academic level, it's difficult, but then just on a human level, like humans are so complex and they're a lot less, our muscles are a lot less complex than like our lived experience and our conscious experience. And, with muscles, it's like we know enough about it that if you get the load and the stimulus right, like you'll probably get stronger. And obviously that's like really oversimplifying it and dumbing it down, and there's a real science, and there's still more that we need to know about how we get stronger and fitter, but we still know loads more about that, and it's much easier to track than what's going on in our minds. I personally love that about psychology and mindset. I think the fact that we don't know that much about it and it's all super vague and really hard to pin down is like one of the things that to me makes it so interesting. But to other people, it makes it frustrating. And it's something that they then don't want to burden themselves with. They're like, well, I know I can focus on the physical side of it. I'll probably make improvements if I just focus on that alone. So I'll just ignore the other stuff. And that's not just in climbing, that's in our lives as well, right? And
totally agree.
This is where like, the non-climbers listening to this, it's like it's so much easier to go, okay, well, I'll just focus on a healthy diet. I'll focus on my sleep. And obviously like mind and body, it intersects in massive ways. Or I'll focus on like the external things in my life, but what I won't think about is like my emotions and how I talk about my emotions and the level of stress that I feel in my body. And I'm gonna disconnect from how that feels, because that's really complex and confusing, and I'd much rather just like focus on these physical things that I can track.
It's scary, isn't it? Because you've got to open the can, haven't you, on, who you are as a child, if there's any childhood trauma, like how your mind was. And I think for someone who's like read a lot about self-development and why we do certain things, I'm still working on that myself. I think there's a lot, like I say, a lot of people that will be closed off to that. But I'm guessing you see through your own work with yourself and then through work with clients just how much of an impact that can have. from a climbing aspect, is there any kind of situations where you've seen it really come into play, even with yourself or a client, where you're like, God, this really, really does work?
Yeah, just all the time, all the time. Yeah, I mean, I think that for me personally, I was sort of doing okay without putting that much thought into my mindset and mental training from a climbing perspective. I was doing okay, but I wasn't operating at the best that I could be operating at by any means. Um, some of the clients that come to me though, they're like ready to give up the sport because of some of the mental aspects, because they're so scared and they're so stressed that when they book a climbing holiday, they're not even excited about it. They're actually just like dreading it deep down because they know that climbing stresses them out so much. And you think, okay, well, that's just someone's hobby. Why do they keep doing it? But it's like maybe they love it enough that they're just hoping that something might change, or it's because all of their friends and their partner does it. So they don't want to give it up because that's giving up their community and their identity. So they just keep pushing on with it, even though there's these kind of mental barriers that are making it not even fun anymore. So like a lot of the people that come to our courses, it's like, that's like their last chance in a way to do something about it. So then with those people, I see like epic transformations where it's like they're ready to give up the sport and they're kind of hating it more than they're loving it, to then finding their passion again and learning like how to manage their fear in like a sustainable way rather than just like pushing through all the time. So yeah, and the people I coach, I see massive transformations. And then for me personally, what I've really liked seeing is that like everything I've learned to kind of like optimize my mindset in the climbing space, I've then transferred into other areas of my life. So like a lot of the fears I had around starting a business or like being visible or like speaking on a podcast like this, or like I did a speaking tour that I found pretty stressful, it's like all those things, even just like really human things like, I lost my dad and like recovering from the grief of that, like all the knowledge that I had of like just processing emotions and stress and just it all helped basically. So it's not like, yeah, oh, let's just do it for our sports. That I think the thing that makes me so passionate about all of this is that if you do work on your mindset for your sport, I bet it will help you in your job as well. And maybe it will help you in your relationships at home, and maybe it helps with your friends. So there's this like wholesale positive ripple effect that I think that can come from kind of like, some of this work basically.
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? Because we often associate, well, I do anyway, with sport and physical activity and I said this yesterday, I went shooting with a friend of mine, Nicole, who's been on the show. And she was like, how do you feel? And I feel like all the stresses and worries of normal day-to life have just gone because you've got to focus on the target, you've got to focus on your breathing, and everything else kind of disappears. And I suppose what you're kind of asking, though, is to not necessarily whilst you're doing the sport, but we do sport as kind of an escapism. But what are we escaping? Like, we actually need to tackle that first because you're effectively dragging that into your sport, aren't you? Which is quite hard because people are like, no, I'm doing it to escape. Like, when you're in the zone, you forget about everything else. But let's tackle what's really happening before, and you are seeing that massive change in people. Because I imagine when you turn, like, climbing's not something that you can just, rock up to and I want to say half-heartedly, but you can't really, can you?
It depends. It depends. I mean, you can sort of go to the climbing gym and go bouldering and sort of half-heartedly give it an effort, yeah. But maybe the people who are going to get taken by the sport find that sort of presence that you just described that you found shooting. Maybe they find that right away, and then that's what gets them hooked.
And then it's further down the journey that they need to look at.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be helpful for people right at the start to look at this stuff, because then you start building good habits right from the get-go. Because so many of the people who come to us, it's like we've got to rewire and rebuild sometimes like they've been climbing 20, 30 years and they've been doing it a certain way,
Right.
and we're totally changing their approach. And then that can be harder than just working with someone who's only been climbing 6 months or whatever.
Yeah.
And that they can then build good habits from the start. Because basically, when it comes to fear management, I think quite a lot of our like intuitions around what works aren't actually always right.
Okay.
Like, and it'd be interesting to hear what your intuitions are on it, given that your podcast is called She Who Dares Wins. It's like, I think, yeah, in some senses, like we're all a bit too cautious these days, right? And we don't step outside our comfort zone. And I'm a big advocate for challenging yourself, like physically and psychologically. And I just think that it's really hard to live like a totally fulfilled life if you stay in your comfort zone.
Yeah.
But it's also not great to like continuously put yourself in situations that you can't handle. There's got to be like a good dose, right? It's like when people go climbing for the first time and they're like, okay, well, this is all about just being as scared as possible, and I'm just going to force myself to do it. And then like, that's what this is about. And it's like, no, it's really not. Like, you're just going to have a terrible time if you do that.
Yeah.
And you're going to like panic. And, you know, there's people that I've coached that something happened really early on in their climbing because they had that mindset. You know, they took a nasty fall or they just had a really shit time. And then from that, they are now too stressed and too scared. They basically had like a bit of a traumatic experience,
Right, okay.
basically.
Which never helps anyone, does it?
No.
Yeah.
So there's also just got to be some like nuance and, you know, just approaching it in this like moderate, smart way, as well as like not just having this like, well, I just need to like go for it, you know. So wait, what was your question?
No, I feel that's really interesting because, yeah, I understand there's going to be a mindset of people that, and adrenaline junkies is the wrong word, but I mean, I myself loved it, especially in my 20s, trying new things that I'd never done before. But not having the mindset is going to put you in this kind of, it's fight or flight, isn't it? Which is not the greatest mode to be in, especially when you're trying to do something that you enjoy. And I think back mainly towards snowboarding, the times when I've put myself on, you know, the side of a mountain, numerously actually, with an instructor who's like, yes, you just jump down the mountain. I'm like, it's literally a 90-degree angle. And the fear then took away any sort of enjoyment. But if I step back a couple of, you know, to a decent black run that is still incredibly hard, but I know it's just outside of my, you know, what I can do, has been so enjoyable because I've done it and then thought, wow, and not absolutely been in this state of mind of just, I can't do it, I won't do it. So does that come down to knowing your capabilities as well and knowing yourself?
To how to get that challenge level right. Yeah. So like we have a whole online course basically that helps people get that challenge level right, because that's what it comes down to, is like, yeah, finding that sweet spot where you're challenged but you're still able to cope in the moment. And that's where, you know, you'll find flow state and presence, and any enjoyable experience that you've had doing a sport or doing something difficult, it will have been in that sweet spot basically. And unfortunately, it is really hard to find that sweet spot when you first start something, because you don't have a great knowledge of like what you're capable of yet. Sure. And it's really easy to make mistakes. So I mean, finding a good mentor or a good coach early on can be helpful, or like just doing research, or like, you know, if you were to start climbing, for example, just like asking questions and watching what other people do, and, you know, just trying to learn. And it doesn't matter if you get it wrong most of the time. Like in climbing, there's enough safety sort of infrastructure in place that like, even if you get it wrong, hopefully you won't hurt yourself. Like, you know, there's a chance that you'd hurt yourself, just like in snowboarding or whatever. Yeah. Right. And you have to sort of go into that knowing that risk is there. But it's not like, you know, we're getting people to free solo something straight away, right? So but I think, and then the main thing is like doing things really incrementally. And if you're like ever in this position of going, okay, well, I'm here and I can kind of see what I want to do next, but it feels like too big a step. It's like, then the next question is, okay, well, what can I do to break down that challenge so that I can get from where I am? Like, how can I build a bridge from where I am now to where I want to be? And yeah, understanding how to like either bring the next thing closer or to take that first little step, basically. But then also a big part of that process that fewer people talk about is like the embodied part of it. So how do we know when we're going into a situation that we might not be able to cope with? Usually there'll be some red flags in the body.
Yeah. So do you think a lot of people switch those off?
Yeah.
Ah.
I think that just like the modern world and, we're very cerebral, we like to overthink things, and we're very much in our thinking minds, aren't we? Like the written words, the internet, like we're getting, I think, further away from being just connected to our bodies and to our like natural intuition. And I think also that we've, as a society, normalized stress. So we're all very used to being stressed.
Yeah.
So like starting a climb, for example, and feeling a lot of anxiety and stress, you're like, well, this is kind of normal because I felt this like in my work day, and I felt this when like my kids were screaming at me or something, So I think we sort of disconnect or normalize from stress, like, physiological responses in the body, basically, that could be warning signs. So, like when you were with that instructor, there were probably warning signs.
Yeah, like the heart pounding it on the chairlift up, and it comes down to those pressures of, my mates were on the mountain. It's something that I'd been staring out the window of the chalet for ages. You're with an instructor, you don't want to say no to an instructor. Yeah, it's fascinating.
They're all thoughts. They're all things trying to persuade you that this is the right thing to do because you want to like have done that experience, but you weren't actually probably ready for it. And there was probably those warning signs in the body. And then what makes it worse is that stress response in the body, also how that plays out is that it makes you also, if it's too stressful, you then don't manage that experience well. You probably you could freeze up, so you don't even then snowboard as well, which then makes you more likely to hurt yourself and have a bad time, and it kind of negatively snowballs from there.
Yeah.
Whereas if you were in the right challenge zone, you'd have all of these like positive feelings in the body. You'd have the good endorphins. You'd have a stress response, but it would be like really manageable and like actually help you perform in the moment. And then you'd be like, oh my God, I'm snowboarding so well. And then you feel even more confident, and then you'd have that positive ripple effect.
Yeah.
So, and
is that called flow state?
Like it is an actual thing, it's not just sort of like something that hippies have decided to talk about, or that like some athletes believe in and others don't or something. Like it's quite supported by academic studies now as a kind of state of mind, with like people debate over like the specific dimensions of it and stuff. But basically I think, I don't know, if like maybe I bet you've experienced it podcasting, where you're like in the conversation, you're totally immersed in it, and you like don't know where the time's gone, and the conversation feels really automatic. You feel totally in tune with the guest, and like your question really seems to flow from what they've just said, and there's this like natural flow to the conversation that would have just been so hard to engineer but just happened. That's flow.
Yeah. And it depends on so many different parameters.
Yeah.
Like whether you've had a stressful day, whether the guests had a stressful day, whether you think you know enough about them. There's so much to come into it. But I think, would you say a big thing from this then is just having the awareness that working on these things can help you? Because I think there's probably a lot of people out there that go through life they probably don't have the time to think about themselves like we don't. We're busy and we're constantly on social media and judging other people. And actually, what's really important is to be a little bit, I've said this previously, a little bit selfish. And it's actually not selfish. It's just bringing it back to you. And then all the other, like you said, all the other elements of your life start to fall into place because you're controlling what you might use in sport and you might think is important to get you further in sport, but actually is going to help in every single area of your life. I just want to ask you about, because you're a new mom, and I've become, as a mom, overly aware of the power of the mind with kids. So, funnily enough, both my children have been to parties, climbing parties, and both have been absolutely terrible. And I know as a mum, I shouldn't say terrible, but like, I literally wouldn't climb above probably like my shoulder height. And I is this clip and climb, and I was like, okay, I don't want, because I was a timid kid, and then kind of my like extreme sports came out like teens and 20s, and I'm like, what can I do? We did the worst thing possible as a and I would like this is we put a monetary value on a height. And I'm mortified that we did that. We were like, actually, if you climb today, you get 20 quid. And I'm like, hold on. Yeah, so bad, so bad. Is this because of our external, there's parents watching, there's kids, mostly the girls, to the top. And I'm like, the boys were not so much. Girls were like bang to the top. And I was like, okay, what's the mindset? What's good? And I can see they weren't physically shaky, but it's a mindset thing as well. Like physically, they can climb. And I came away and I felt horrible. And B, I was like, okay, like, how do we help kids with this? Because as adults, we're a bit more aware of who we are, what's stopping us, but how to get that into kids. And I see it more and more now that I think when I was a kid, we were a little bit more adventurous because you were allowed to be. We didn't have all these distractions. I played on a building site, which again, I'm mortified about, when I was probably like 7 till 13 and just did these crazy things off scaffolding and things. Now kids are a little bit more mollycoddled. There's TV, there's screens. Is that something you've become aware of since like becoming a mom, or do you think it's something you'll just figure out on your journey now that you're aware of how much of an impact it can have? And I promise I won't tell my kids to climb for £20.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot there. I mean, I think like the interesting thing from your perspective is like what was it in you that wanted them to go higher?
I could see myself in both my kids as me. I was the young, timid one that was kind of always left behind. And I did say afterwards, I was like, if you don't enjoy it, and because my husband's in sport and he teaches at the uni, and he has got a great mindset. He's like, do every type of sport and then let the child lead. You don't ever, push them into whatever. And you see pushy parents and how much that has an impact. And I think it purely came from me. Like, they clearly weren't enjoying it. They didn't want to climb any higher. And that's hard because that's everything I would never want to be, yet I became it.
And so I think it's cool though that you've got that self-awareness and, that you can then think that through and be like, what is that? Is that, you don't want your kids to be the timid ones or whatever it is, like, but why not? We're all just like,
different, yeah.
we're all different, and like they might be brave in other contexts.
Yeah.
And maybe they actually were being brave going a foot off the ground, but you didn't see that as brave.
Yeah.
I didn't climb above my dad's shoulders for like years probably.
Okay.
So, and then like now I do all these things that people think of as really brave. So yeah, I mean, you don't know. I think we don't know what's often going on in other people's heads, especially kids. But I think adding that external pressure is usually not that helpful. I think that sometimes like a bit of cajoling can sometimes just tip the threshold of like, oh, they're like, oh, they kind of want to do it, but like, you know, if we say, okay, we'll have that ice cream afterwards, like, I don't know if that's that big a deal, but having there to be loads of external pressure, we kind of know to be usually not that helpful and can cause people to get into that space of like being really over challenged. You know, like talking about your experience snowboarding, it's like there was a lot of external pressure in there that probably contributed to you being in that place where you shouldn't have been. But what was your broader question about
kids, like the importance of, because we work on it as adults, don't we? And notably more so just because we've sought it out, whether we've got to a block in life or we just you read a book and you go, oh, I want to work on this, and then you get into a rabbit hole. With kids, it's not taught in schools.
Yeah, I think it's sad that it's not taught in schools. I think that like at least having a language around emotions as parents can be really helpful, and just trying to encourage being open and communicative about what's actually how you feel on the inside, you know, what you're thinking, what you're feeling, and not just focusing on all of the externals all the time. And I don't think you need to be an expert in psychology or know too much to make positive steps in that direction. And then I think that the other thing is just like, you know, you were talking about, okay, well, like, where does the motivation for working on your mindset come from? Like, okay, maybe it's because you discovered something in sport, but I think being a parent for a lot of people is a big motivation. And I think that's really nice that they're going, okay, well, I noticed that I'm probably carrying quite a bit of shit from my, can I say shit?
Yeah.
I can swear we're like, you know, from like baggage from my childhood. Like, how do I not pass that on to my kids?
I'm overly aware of that, yeah. And there's no like deep child trauma there, but I was a very shy kid, but I was always really good at sport. That was my thing. And I think there's probably an element in there of like, you know, if you can get sport as your thing, it's like, maybe that's not your thing.
Yeah. And maybe your kids don't need that in the same way that you did, or I don't know, but also just like, I feel like for most of like our generation, like the way that our parents parented in some ways might have been better, in some ways might have been worse. So it's like trying to sort of figure out, you know, what you want to take on and then what you want to leave. And I think, you know, you pointed towards this before. It was like, we do cuddle our kids more now. And I think one benefit of doing sports that are slightly risky is that if you have a history of like making risk decisions, you can bring that into your parenting, because I think parenting is the place where you're thrown into risk decisions immediately. Like, just as a pregnant woman, you're like, okay, well, how important is it for me to wash my lettuce? You know, what's the actual risk? You know, or like, should I have this type of birth or that type of birth? You've got to weigh up the risks. And then with a newborn, it's like, we really wanted to co-sleep early on with our little baby, but all of the co-sleeping rules are like, seemed so strict to the point where it's like, I can't sleep like the way that you are advising me to. So that means I'm going to have to put my baby in a cot. But everything is telling me that I don't want to put my baby alone in a cot. Not saying that that's bad or anything, but just that's how I felt. So in the end, we did trust our intuition, and our baby slept on our chests like for the first 3 months of her life or something. But that was a hard call, because people were telling us that our baby was going to die if we did that, you know? So like, which sounds like overblown, but
it's reality.
You know, that is the messaging you get, and there's research to support that, you know, and you've got to go, okay, well, is this research compelling enough for me to modify what my natural intuition is telling me, or is it not? So whether you realize you're doing it or not, as a parent, you're making risk decisions straight away. And it's like, or like when they learn to ride a bike, like that first moment that you take them on a bike when there's car traffic coming the other way.
Yeah.
That is a risk decision.
Yeah.
And something could go wrong,
Mm.
but what are you going to do? You can't remove all risk from your child's life. And we focus so much on physical safety these days that we're totally blinded to all of the psychological risks that there are nowadays that weren't there when we were kids. I don't know your age, but like I didn't grow up with social media and the internet. And like we're putting phones and computers in the hands of kids and not really paying enough. We're starting to now, but we're not really paying enough attention to what that is doing to their brains and to their mental health. But we're so overly cautious about them, like, not climbing up a tree.
I know. It's crazy, isn't it? We've just gone so far wrong.
So I think a big thing for parents and like, the question of whether to engage in this stuff is like, all of that work that you'll do on yourself is going to filter to your kids. There's just no chance that it won't. And so again, it's like the double positive effect, I think.
Yeah, work on yourself before you can help others. It's classic, isn't it? You can say that when you're on a plane. Put your own air on before you sort somebody else. So your big dare then was the shift into starting your own business. What were some of the big obstacles for you then? Was it just you're not really stepping out from sport world because it was, I guess, a lateral kind of movement. But what were some of the big fears you had to kind of get over?
So basically, I had been a coach previously, so I had a sort of little bit of a coaching business. But the big step was to create this thing that was somewhat separate from myself, which is my company called Strong Mind, and to create online courses in fear management and mindset for climbers. And no one had done that before, really.
Oh, okay.
And so it was really like, what if I put all this energy into this thing and it fails? What if, I think a lot of those fears really boil down to like fear of what other people think. And I had to, I think coming from climbing, there was just this big part of me that was like, people won't take me seriously doing this thing. Like people know me as a climber. People know that I can climb well, but she's just this like little girl who goes climbing. She's not a woman who can do something that's outside of that, that there's this fears around like identity and other people's perceptions of me. It's because it just felt like I was stepping into a slightly different person, not a different personality, but it was just sort of like being visible in a different way or something.
Sure. Yeah.
Like changing. Yeah, I don't know, but it just felt scary, basically.
I suppose you're seen as a doer, and now that you then become a teacher.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. And being seen as a teacher, but also just being seen as someone who could be professional, I suppose, as well. And like, sell a product and market a product and create a product that worked for people and wasn't just... Because lots of athletes turn to coaching, but it doesn't make them good coaches,
Sure.
Just because they're good themselves. So like just being taken seriously as this thing that wasn't just climbing for myself. It felt scary, basically. Yeah.
Are you over that now, or?
Yeah, but there's still stuff to work on. Like I've done a bit of corporate coaching, which is like a totally different world for me. I've never been part of the corporate world. And so when I step into like offices in London, there's so much imposter syndrome and there's so much of like, I really don't belong here. And that's the benefit of working on your mindset, because then now, like in the past, my thought would have been, so what should I do? Maybe I shouldn't be here. Okay, I'll just like prepare in this really rigid way and hopefully that's enough to deal with it, sort of thing.
Yeah.
But now I'm like, well, hang on a minute. That's a good thing. it's good that I'm challenging myself. It's good that I'm doing something different. It's good that I'm exposing myself to people who think differently and do different things with their day. So yeah, it's like when you work on your mindset enough, it's like difficult things, obstacles, challenges, they all just become opportunities to like better strengthen your mindset, basically.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the journey I'm on with it now. And it's not to say it ever ends, and it doesn't, but that's what makes it interesting as well. The more you scratch away at the different layers, the more you're like, oh, there's something else under here, you know?
Yeah, it's scary, isn't it? Because like when you
Yeah.
get to the end of it, when you nail it, and you won't ever, because it's life, isn't it?
Yeah.
And more things will come and go and leave us. And I think that's the beauty of it. I've been trying to focus more on that beauty of being in that grit zone and the growth zone, rather than that I was very much the end product person. Like, I need to get there, I need to get there. And actually just sitting every day and just thinking, wow, it's really good now. Don't, it's all about, you see people, don't they, when they're like got to a certain level and they're like, oh, the journey was just so much more fun than the end. And it's so easy to forget that. I have to remind myself on a daily basis. But I'm really excited for you, because I feel like if anyone is qualified, it completely is you, because you've done these amazing things with your career, and now you're helping other people, which I imagine is giving you another kind of lease of life as such, in that you can give back to climbers. And I'm guessing it's now spreading out from climbers into corporate, and there's so many different walks of life that you can have an impact with your teaching. Is that something that presumably you want to do in the next couple of years, is just keep going and reaching a broader audience?
Yeah, I do flip-flop a bit with it. Like when I created Strong Mind, in the back of my head, I was like, I would like to broaden this. But then I also just like love working with climbers and just do love the climbing world. So I think I'll sort of step out here and there and maybe slowly expand it. Like I would love to like sort of take the Strong Mind course that we created for climbers and make it for like sort of high stakes careers.
Okay.
But like in like a broad, like high stakes taken very broadly, like, not that, okay, you might die or that you might hurt
Highly
yourself.
pressured
Yeah,
jobs.
just high pressure, where it feels high stakes a lot of the time, where you feel like, okay, if I get this pitch wrong, I might lose my job, even if that's not the actual reality of it.
Yeah.
So that would be nice to do, but these are all sort of like long-term projects. Right now, next few years is be quite focused on our daughter. And I still like really like climbing to a high level myself as well. So it's not like other sports. I feel like people sort of retire from them and then they like start their coaching business or whatever. But climbing is really like a lifelong sport. Like you don't really retire from it. And I think that because it's so skill based and it's so psychological, you can actually climb to quite a high level, even when like the physical side drops off a bit.
Interesting.
So I also I'd like heavily prioritize my own climbing still.
Yeah. It's kind of the practice what you preach though as well. It's nice because then, like you say, a lot of coaches leave and perhaps get a little bit of out of touch with what originally started them off, where you've still got that.
And I apply everything to myself first, I'm my own guinea pig.
Yeah.
And what's great is my husband works with me in my business as well. And he also is a really good climber and wants to pursue his own climbing still. So it's very much just, when we do our courses, we're like in it with our students as well. We're like, this is something that we're still doing and we're still applying this like on a daily basis. This is not something we just used to do.
Yeah.
Which I think just makes it more powerful for us and for them.
Yeah. I definitely think your services would be well received in the construction world. Because like many a times I went to work and completely ran off the same adrenaline of this like fear factor, and big decisions were made, and it's one of the most dangerous like industries to work in. It got crazy, and the mindset is never. I think if you went to a load of construction workers and started to talk about mindset, they're just like.
Do you think they would be open to it, or do you think they're not there yet?
I think the big companies have to. I think it's an industry with a high suicide rate. It's an industry with like it's so dangerous. It's an industry where a lot of things on a daily basis are really high stakes. A lot of it aligns with, an extreme sport. And mindsets, I would say, are just so far behind, because I think, when your life has been tough, and lots of people in that industry come from different walks of life, and a lot of them have, not had the easiest ride, that's the last thing that gets looked at, isn't it? Because it's survival mode. And then you take in that survival mode into an industry that is high stakes. Sometimes it's catastrophic. And I've seen grown men cry. I've seen a lot of the physical alterations are due to what somebody's gone through that morning, not necessarily what's just happened on site. Decisions that are made are run by egos. I mean, it's endless. And there's always, quite interestingly, like a health and safety meeting on the physical side. And it's like, no one ever pulls someone aside and says, you're probably not in the best mind frame right now to jump on a digger. How about, do you want to just spend the day, on the shovel? Never has any of those conversations ever happened. And I think the big companies need to realize that, because selfishly, I don't think their mindset is on individuals, but actually it's that common thing, isn't it? You work on the individual, the beast runs so much more efficient, so much better. Like, we're humans, but we're not focusing on the human, we're focusing on everything else. So yeah, it's you could lap up.
Yeah, I wonder if whether they like, it's such a masculine industry. I don't know. Sometimes I think that having a male figure is maybe more powerful. I don't know, but I also think those masculine industries, some gender stereotyping is true, and I think masculine industries are slow to catch up with psychological safety and well-being. It's kind of like the military. Me and my husband have done a bit of work with the military, and you'd think that in the military they'd be so switched on to this stuff, and in some regiments and areas they are, but not in others. And I think that, something you said right at the start of this conversation is that it's a bit of a can of worms. I think sometimes it's like, people are like, let's not poke the beast. What are we going to find if we start digging here, Like, it's better to just like pay people off. Yeah. if they can't go on, It's just easier to do that. But it's a shame because, even if you're thinking on just a completely selfish, like, cost efficiency perspective, I mean, like, the burden of mental health is insane. Billions. Yeah. And so if you run a big organization, whether that's government or private, you have to start thinking about that, even just from a cost perspective, because you're going to have people taking all their sick days if you don't look after them. Yeah. It's just that simple, really.
Yeah. I mean, I could talk to you for hours about this stuff. It's so interesting. I'm so fascinated. But yeah, you have very much dared and won. And thank you for sharing your story today and giving us some amazing insights into what you're working on and how that can help others. I really appreciate that and look forward to seeing where you go next.